Today, we are going to look at surveys. Survey says, if you want the right answers, ask the right questions. We have just a couple of objectives for our workshop. We want to make sure that we can recognize how cognition impacts survey respondents, those who answer your survey. We want to make sure we can identify the standards that are important in a survey. We'll be able to come up with strategies to increase survey participation. And finally, look at the best practices and be able to analyze the issues that we sometimes see in directions and questions with surveys. There's a very important distinction between survey and questionnaire. When we talk about a survey, that's the larger process. We're collecting information from the respondents, but we're also analyzing and appraising the data. So the survey is the process which uses the questionnaire to ask the questions, collect the responses, analyze those responses, and really have some good results that we can utilize with whatever purpose it was that we had decided to participate in the process of surveying. A survey could technically gather data, a questionnaire could gather data from medical records or from educational records or even journals or diaries. But for our purposes, we are looking at those questionnaires that are given to respondents. Questionnaire is the part of the survey that is that standardized set of questions, sometimes as prompts, and it is administered to a select or a target population, a target group of people, a sample of a population. Questionnaires are statistically useful. They can be descriptive, where we really look at what exists at this moment, or they can be analytical, where we know why a certain situation exists. We can explore, we can explain with our analytical data. We can have open-ended questions where the answer from the participant could be pretty much anything. How do you feel today? They could provide a fill-in-the-blank type answer, or it could be close-ended, where there are specific options for answers. Which of the following most accurately describes your feelings? Happy, sad, content, excited about this workshop on surveys. Okay, to get us started, I want to show you a clip from The Big Bang Theory. And in this short 1 to 3 minute clip, it is looking at what the Big Bang Theory called the Indian Marriage Questionnaire. So I would like you to watch it and think about the few questions they are asking on this questionnaire and come up with at least 3 issues that you see with the questionnaire. Oh, not catching it. There we go.
Wow, you really are good at this.
Well, I've spent a lot of time painting D&D miniatures. I know that makes you want to rip my shirt off, but wait until your nails are dry. Thrash. He sent us that Indian marriage questionnaire.
Ooh, read one.
Okay. How religious are you? That's easy. Both of us not at all.
Well, I would say not at all. I mean, I'm pretty spiritual. I do go to yoga.
Great. So your church is Our Lady of the Stretchy Pants. Next question. How close are you with your family?
Pretty close.
I'm going to say not too close, but I'm hoping to get farther. How do you feel about children?
They're okay, I guess. I mean, if I saw one, I wouldn't throw a rock at it.
Why would you throw a rock at a child?
I just said I wouldn't.
The question is, would you like to have kids? So yeah, we want kids.
Yeah, someday.
Like in the next 5 years.
Sure. The next question?
How are you with pets? Well, I did take care of Sheldon for 15 years and he only bit me twice.
Okay. So hopefully in watching that, you could notice.
Our heart is growing. Want to get away to the pristine beaches of Hilton Head Island, South Carolina?
In fact, a few issues with the questionnaire. You could have more answers than the ones I'm about to show you, but just to see if we're all kind of on the same page. The 4 questions were, how religious are you? How close are you with your family? How do you feel about children? And how are you with pets? How religious are you? Penny felt she was religious because she went to yoga. And her companion, whose name I cannot think of, felt he wasn't religious at all. So one of the problems with the question was terminology. What exactly is religion? Does yoga qualify? Does yoga not qualify? How close are you with your family? What does family mean? What does close mean? How do you feel about children? Is this really a feeling question? Is it a thinking question? Is it an attitude question? So we see some terminology issues. There's some interpretation issues. Again, is yoga religion? How do you feel about children? Well, Penny wouldn't throw rocks at them. And Leonard, that's the guy's name, Leonard said, the question is, would you like to have children? Well, technically, Leonard, that wasn't the question. The question was, how do you feel about children? So we see an interpretation issue. How are you with pets? What does that even mean? Would you not throw rocks at pets? Would you like to have a pet? What does how are you mean? So we have a lack of defined answer choices. These, of course, were all open, but it kind of sounds like maybe they were meant to be closed. There was definitely a lot of room for interpretation. There were other issues. These are just a few, so we can start to consider the importance of good questions in a questionnaire. Another thing we want to consider is the process that individuals go through when they take a questionnaire. In order to have an effective questionnaire, we need to understand the thought processes that a respondent is going to go through when they're part of the survey process. We know there is a conscious or an explicit cognitive process. This is purposeful thinking. Think about metacognition. You think about what you're thinking about. When you take an algebra test, you probably have to put forth some effort into thinking about those questions. When you tie your shoes, you probably aren't going through because that's kind of an unconscious or implicit process. You've done it so many times, it just happens. 4 steps are involved in most models of the cognitive process when it comes to surveys and questionnaires. First is comprehension. With comprehension, people are what we call cognitive misers. People don't like to think too much, most people. We have limited resources, and so we take cognitive shortcuts. So we don't have to overextend ourselves in our thinking. We don't have to use up all of our cognitive energy. So when you're designing a survey, when you're designing a questionnaire, you want to think about the cognitive demand. How much mental energy, how much cognitive energy is it going to take to understand the instructions? How much cognitive energy is it going to take to understand the questions, pull up your answer to the questions, put that into usable information? Question instructions are often not even read. Okay, people think they know what the instructions are. Again, cognitive misers don't want to think too much, and so might not even read the instructions. If they do read them, we want to make sure they're understandable, they're not complicated. If I've used up all my mental energy in understanding the instructions, what do I have left for the questions? Obviously, the same holds for the questions. First of all, you have to pay attention to understand a question. So that speaks to motivation. And if you've paid attention, you must now interpret those questions. How are the components related? What do the terms mean? Why am I being asked this? How's it going to make me look if I answer it a certain way? What does the person giving me the survey want me to say? All of those are thoughts that the respondent may go through. Could distract from comprehension, for sure. So we want to be mindful of that. Assuming we've paid attention, we understand the question, we now need to go through the process of retrieval, where we are able to retrieve from our minds the thoughts, feelings, behaviors we've had in the past so we can answer the question. One thing that can help is cues. So little situational or contextual cues that help the respondent pull up the information. The more cues we have, the better. This can sometimes act as priming. For example, if I were to say, I'm going to ask you a survey about winter and things you like to do in the winter. And I start painting a picture of winter activities. If I present information about ice skating and the pond and the fire pit, you might now start to think about warming your hands. You might think about hot chocolate, because I've primed you for those winter activities. Theoretically, that will help you retrieve the information that I'm asking about. Judgment. So with judgment, two good summary points. Fluency, how easily we are able to recall, how easily we're able to comprehend. Lots of studies have been done with fluency in terms of not just how it relates to cognition, but how it relates then to our attitude and our mood. For example, a story that is in large, clear print, easy to understand, tends to be viewed as more favorable than the exact same story when it has smaller, fuzzy print. So how much time and energy does it take for me to recall, retrieve the information I need? That's fluency. The more cues, hopefully the better fluency. The other problem we sometimes have with judgment is reconstructed memory. Every time we pull up a memory, we add into it, when we re-encode it, little bits of extra information that may or may not be true. It could be related to a story we've heard, something we've read, something we've seen on television. And when we re-encode that information, it impacts our memory of that. So we have to be mindful of reconstructed memory. Finally, we get, in terms of the cognitive process, to reporting. We map the answer to the question, and we tend to, as respondents, try to align our answers to previous answers we've given. We like to look consistent, both to ourselves and to others. And since we've already answered some questions, we now have to make sure, if we're worried about alignment as a respondent, that our future answers align with what we've already said. We don't want to look like we've lied or we're inconsistent. We don't want to have cognitive dissonance. And so Aligning becomes part of this cognitive process. Uses up some of our mental energy. We want to make this this cognitive process as simplistic as possible, as easy as possible. We want to have clear instructions. We want to have clear questions. We want to use unbiased, non-leading cues that help our respondents pull up information. We want them to be able to do it easily, and we want them to be able to flawlessly report. Doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes we find respondents will use heuristics. A heuristic is a mental shortcut. We already know we're cognitive misers, so we use these mental shortcuts. One example of a heuristic is availability. I could ask you, are there more tornadoes in Kansas or Oklahoma? You're likely to think Kansas. Why? The Wizard of Oz. Okay, that's the availability heuristic, the information that comes to mind. Sometimes we won't think at all. Okay, sometimes we won't look at that explicit thought process, but we'll rely on our implicit, unconscious thinking, often based on feeling. Nonverbal is implicit, just as another example. I'm not really reading, I'm not really thinking, I'm just going with how it feels. That would be an implicit process. Not very helpful with getting accurate information. So when they're not thinking, when our respondents aren't using that cognitive process, when they're using their implicit or heuristics or just plain going down and choosing C for everything, we have some potential problems. One problem we have, even if they are thinking, is an encoding error. When we think, when we remember, we go through 3 phases. We encode, we store, and then we retrieve. We encode the information, we get it into our mind. We store it there until we need it, and then we pull it back up, we retrieve it when we're ready to use it. We can have errors all along the way. An encoding error suggests we never got the information into our memory in the first place. So I might not have been paying attention. I could ask you, where is the date located on a penny, on the coin, a penny? And now you're probably thinking about it. If you never stopped and really looked at that penny and encoded the information, you wouldn't know that it is kind of on the right-hand side beside Lincoln's chest. Okay, if you never got the information in, you can't pull it back out. That would be an encoding error example. Sometimes we have errors with interpreting the questions. That kind of speaks for itself. Sometimes that's because it's a poorly written question, and sometimes it's based on the respondent's own lack of understanding of the question. We can have forgetting errors and retrieval errors. Remember, encode, get it in, store. Sometimes it doesn't stay in storage, we forget, and sometimes we can't retrieve it. 2 of the most common are interference, where other information gets in the way, and decay, where we lose information because of the passage of time. The cues will help combat this. We might have flawed cognitive strategies, speaks for itself. We could have answer formatting issues. If the question and the answers are not aligned, our participant is more likely to have issues in thinking and how to accurately answer the question. For example, if the question is, how much water did you use in your home last month? And then my answer choices, because that's what they were for every other question, is rarely, sometimes, often, never. There's a misalignment, and that's going to make it difficult to get an accurate answer. I could possibly phrase that in the last 30 days, how much water would you say your household used, and then have my answer choices more than usual, about the same as usual, less than usual, that aligns. Misreporting. People like to be helpful, and so sometimes they might answer in a way they think you want them to. People might want to be hurtful and just give you bad answers because they're mean-spirited. Sometimes people are afraid to give accurate answers because they don't want to face their own reality, or maybe they're embarrassed. Maybe they just don't understand. Of course, we have as well failure to follow instructions. So we understand the thought process most people hopefully take. We understand what can happen if they don't take that process, and we have a few strategies to help them take the process. We also want to be careful of meeting a few standards. Content standards we're looking at is the question asking the right information. Is the content what it is meant to be? Will this set of questions answer or give me the information I need it to? Is it the right answers? Are they the right questions? Cognitive standards, we're looking for some evidence that the respondent has consistently understood, they have the answers, they're willing to give them, they're true answers, and they're true to the question. And then usability. If I am trying to find out more about the exercise habits of the elderly, and I send my survey to the elderly on Snapchat, I might have some usability standard issues. Can the questionnaire be accessed? Can it be completed as it was intended? Okay, usability standards. Validity, we know the extent to which it's measuring what it's intended to measure. We have construct validity, validity of cause, validity of effect, and reliability. If respondents are consistent in their answers, some of this is going to look at understanding of the questions and instructions, willingness to share information. Are they in a hurry when they took it? Are they just trying to get done? Okay, these components are important in our survey. So what do I do with all this? How can I make sure it is in fact a good survey? There's a few strategies. You can use all of them, you can use a few of them. Hopefully you're using at least one of them. Ask an expert. We have content experts. These are people who are experts on the content that you're putting in the survey. So if it's a survey about military and the perception of military in the public, my questions are about military and the perceptions in the public. If it is a survey about food preferences, the content expert is looking at what data is needed to meet your analytic objective. What information is needed? What data is needed to meet your analytic objective? So food survey should be about food, shouldn't be about farming necessarily. I also might consult with a design expert, content expert, content, design expert, more about the process. Are the questions worded well? Are they worded in a way that it is understandable? The structure of the survey. Do the response alternatives make sense? Do they align with the questions? Are they confusing? What about the order of my questions? Are my instructions understandable? Can I easily navigate through the survey? These are the things that a design expert would look at. You could have a focus group discussion. This is where we have people discussing the topic before we actually make the questions. Usually 6 to 10 people. Usually you have a facilitator and a note taker. And this is going to allow you to better understand what your participants or your target participant group knows about the topic, what terms they tend to use, what terms they don't understand, how they structure their knowledge. It's not going to tell us a whole lot about our questions, but it is going to tell us about our content. Our questions, we can get information by doing a field test. So we would evaluate the instrument, the data collection process, the respondent selection procedures. We debrief, we tabulate, we review. We have a small amount invested in making sure this is good before deploying the larger survey. Kind of like a pilot study. You might know it better as a pilot study. Another strategy, conduct a randomized or split ballot experiment. So really we have two versions, if you will. It's just like it sounds. The problem with this is it might not actually, well, not might not, it probably will not actually determine which version is better. It just gives us information about our versions. How can I reduce those comprehension issues? Be clear. I want to make sure I'm avoiding ambiguity as much as possible. I want to be simple. I don't want to be excessively complex. I could ask, was the facility not unclean? Okay, now I have a double negative. What does that even mean? Was the facility not unclean? Why not just say, was the facility clean? Okay, avoid excessive complexity. Be careful about faulty presumptions. So I could ask something like, during COVID-19, family life has suffered because parents are having their attention divided and they have to concentrate too much on work. Do you agree or disagree? Well, this is a faulty presumption. Yes, COVID-19 is a real thing. Family life may have been impacted, may or may not have suffered. By the way, 18% of the population actually flourished under COVID, but that has nothing to do with this. That's just the teacher in me. Maybe it was because of work and responsibilities if there was suffering, but maybe it was because of something else. Okay, so you have to be careful of faulty presuppositions. Use terms, concepts that are understandable. Use well-defined quantifiers. I'm asking about some demographic information. I'm asking about age, and I say just the following categories: 0 to 25, 25 to 30, 30 to 45. If I'm 25 or I'm 30, do I go 0 to 25 or do I go 20, right? Which category do I fall under? A relatively common mistake, believe it or not. Use familiar terms, speaks for itself. Be careful of false inferences. If I were to ask, are there any situations you can imagine in which you would approve of blah, 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 blah? Any is huge, okay? You can imagine, I'm asking you now to imagine, well, I could imagine a dragon coming along and changing my slides. I mean, you know, be careful of false inferences and be clear in navigation. It speaks for itself. How do I make all this happen? How do I consider my respondents' cognitive needs? How do I make sure I'm reducing issues for them? How do I make sure that I have validity? How do I make sure that I have meeting those standards? Well, one helpful strategy is to use a design matrix. Okay, Make a plan. Who will take your survey? Who do you need? Who has the information that you need? What questions will you ask? Who will use the information? How will you distribute the survey? When do you need the results? Okay. Thinking about this information, putting it into your design matrix, asking others for feedback will help you to know you have addressed all of your needs. So, how am I going to get these answers? I need respondents. How do I get people to respond to my survey? Some people like to take surveys. Some people will take a survey, and some people absolutely will not. Okay. One of the strategies you can use to help gain participants is to explain the purpose. If my participant feels that their knowledge, their answers are important in helping me meet that purpose, they are more likely to respond. Otherwise, I'm just getting people who are really pro or are really con on whatever topic it is that I want to know more about. Explain the purpose. Make your respondents feel that their knowledge is valuable. Have a deadline. Okay. If I receive a link for a survey, I have no deadline, I'll do it later. Next thing you know, I have 50 student emails. I'm not meeting that deadline. It's been buried. If it's a deadline of 3 days, I might do it right now. And in fact, most of the responses we do get in surveys are from people who did it right now, which relates back down a few bullet points to deploy at the right time. Or I might flag it as important and come back to it. Make it accessible. Obviously, if I can't access it, not gonna. Select the right platform for your target population. If I'm looking at those exercise habits of the elderly, I might use a pencil and paper format. I might have someone read the questions and record the answers. If I want to know the drinking habits of college students, I'm going to deploy through social media. Okay. Best time for getting answers if you deploy your survey a Thursday or Friday between 7 a.m. and 1 p.m. Okay. Keep it short. 45% of those surveyed are willing to spend up to 5 minutes. Another statistic on this, if you use more than 10 questions, your response rate drops by half. Okay. Keep it short. Finally, use incentives. A lot of whether or not you can use an incentive and what type of incentive you can use is going to depend on the type of survey you're doing. We know incentives do increase participation only somewhere between about 5 and 20%, which I'm surprised by. I would think it's higher. When I get those surveys from publishers, if I'm guaranteed that Amazon gift card, I'm much more likely personally to answer than if I'm not, or if I'm placed in a random drawing. But apparently I'm the anomaly because using incentives only increases by about 5 to 20%. If it's monetary, it's an average of 19.1%. If it is non-monetary, it's an average of 7.9%. We need respondents. We need those respondents to be able to follow directions. So we want to make that easier for them. On this slide, I've used more words. I'm going to use less verbal descriptors because this is information that you want to make sure you have and can. I mean, it's all important, but this is very cut and dry. Your directions should be easily seen. Make them big. don't let them be overlooked. Let your respondents know your purpose. You might want to do this through an email that you send out ahead of time. You're about to receive a link to a survey which will help me understand more about. Okay. Let your respondents know in those directions if this is anonymous, if it's confidential, how long it will take. If I'm looking at a survey, do I take it or not? And I know it's going to take 15 to 20 minutes versus 5 minutes. That's going to be information that's valuable to me in a few ways. A, am I going to give that time or not? B, am I going to do it now or later? Locate directions where they are to be used. If I'm using a Likert scale at one place and I'm using open-ended at another place, I want the Likert scale directions to be with the Likert scale questions, open-ended directions to be with the open-ended question. Try to use the same general format. So I locate my questions the same way, I locate my directions in the same place. Maybe they're always in a box, maybe they're always in bold. Jump down 2 bullets, same shape, size, position. Okay. Visual guides when I'm changing structure. Okay. So when I shift from those open-ended or closed-ended questions, I can have a visual cue or a visual guide. And I'm very careful to provide definitions for terms, for concepts that might not easily be understood. A couple examples. Please select one. Check all that apply. Okay, to what extent do you agree or disagree? Obviously, I need not just good directions, but I need good questions. You have some things you definitely want to do, and you have some things you definitely want to avoid. Avoid biased questions and terms. Have you ever taken a survey where you've been asked, how satisfied were you with our excellent service? I usually stop right after that, okay, and I don't finish. It's biased. I'm already saying it's excellent service. Be sure the question can be answered and will be answered. How satisfied is your sexual partner with you? Well, I don't know that I can answer that because I'd have to know what they actually think. And I don't know that I'm willing to answer that. Okay. There are definitely ways we can phrase sensitive questions, and we'll look at that next to increase the likelihood of them being answered. Be specific. I don't think the training is not too long, true or false. What? Okay, you want to be specific. You want to ask one question at a time. Avoid double-barreled questions. This is probably an area that even a good survey sometimes falters. So a double-barreled question is really asking 2 things in one question. Was the training interesting and useful? Well, maybe it was interesting, but not at all useful. How do I answer that? Maybe it was useful, but it was a real snoozer. How do I answer that? That should be 2 separate questions. Words and language, easy to be understood. You see that as a theme we've looked at several times. Use memory cues to help with recall. The semester started on a Tuesday. Did you have class on the first day of the semester? I've provided that memory cue of the Tuesday. Use scaled questions with a scale that actually matches the nature of the questions. Who helped you read this survey? Friends, non-friends, positive. It doesn't match. Okay, use scaled questions with the scale matching the nature of the question. If I'm asking how much do you agree, my my Likert scale should be definitely agree, somewhat agree, disagree, not more, less. Okay, it has to match. Include all reasonable possibilities. Maybe none of the above, or no one, or disagree, or not applicable needs to be included. Ask your most important questions first. You want to ask those really important questions while your respondent still has the cognitive energy to answer. You want your open questions near the end, and you want your demographic questions at the end. We often see those demographic questions at the beginning. Why are they at the beginning? I don't know. They shouldn't be. Because at the beginning, we want our most important questions while our participants have cognitive energy. We also want to avoid stereotype threat. If we know from research that if we ask demographic questions that perhaps relate to age or race or sometimes even gender, we have now prompted our participant to be careful that they don't reinforce some type of stereotype with their answers. Okay. Asking those questions at the end decreases stereotype threat. A couple other things to consider. If a question is sensitive, use open questions that are long, even though we said be simple, and clear. By making them longer, you're allowing your respondent to get used to the idea. Try to ask with sensitive questions about a longer period of time. If I'm asking about sex and I say within the last week, that's a little different than I say within the last year. Okay, it makes it easier to answer in the last year. Distant past, address that first. It again eases your participants into that sensitive information so that you can get into the more recent after they're more comfortable. When we ask questions about attitudes, we want to be very clear and specific and use closed questions. People struggle with general attitudes much more than with specific attitudes. So I could ask an attitude question about environmental issues, protecting the environment. Is it important to protect the environment? How do you protect the environment? That's kind of ambiguous. Do you recycle water bottles? That's very specific. Make it closed. Do you do it? Yes or no? How often do you do it? Once a week, twice a week. Okay. Now I'm really honing in on that attitude object. Start with general questions. List the least popular answer choice first. You are more likely to have your participants read all your choices. And when we're dealing with attitudes, we want a 5 to 7 point Likert scale. We often use 5, but with an attitude question, we might need a few more. Okay, we want to pull it all together, and I want to ask you a few questions, do a little assessment so that you can evaluate what you've gained. Have you met our objectives for this workshop, if you will? On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you support the death penalty? What's wrong with that question? Multiple things. On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you support the death penalty? Have you ever been involved in a tragic situation? What's wrong with that question? Do you think the government should spend more on education and less on defense? Everyone likes education. What's wrong with that question? When at the store, I pay with. Most likely, likely, not likely. What's wrong with that? Obviously, multiple things are wrong. But really, what's wrong here? So on a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you support the death penalty? It's biased. I'm calling it the death penalty. Is it specific enough? On a scale of 1 to 5, how much do you support the death penalty? Well, what do you mean by support the death penalty? For rapists, for murderers, for people who shoplift? What do you mean? Can I answer it? I don't know. Do I know enough about the death penalty? Do I know how I feel about it? Will it be answered? What are you going to think of me if I say a 1? What are you going to think of me if I say a 5? Have you been involved in a tragic situation? Well, what's a tragic situation? Is it a tragic situation if my goldfish dies? Is it a tragic situation if I have a flat tire? I can change this by saying most people have been involved in tragic situations. For example, okay, do you think the government should spend more on education and less on defense? It's a double-barreled question. Maybe you do think they should spend more on education, but maybe you don't think they should spend less on defense. I can't answer that the way the question is stated. When at the store, I pay with cash. Okay, I needed to use always. Sometimes that set of answers just does not work. Okay. Hopefully, you were able to see some of these issues, and hopefully you can utilize this information in your questionnaires. If you would like more information, here are some other references that you can consult.